Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. With everything going on in the world right now, one thing that a lot of people are concerned about is the possibility of an EMP. And while other things, like weather events, are more likely, it's still wise to prepare for an EMP because if one were to happen, the consequences would be difficult to imagine. Nearly every aspect of modern life depends on different kinds of technology, including small personal devices all the way up to the power grid as a whole, and most of these would be vulnerable to an EMP. When it comes to the power grid, power lines would act as gigantic antennae, channeling massive amounts of electrical energy into everything connected to the grid. So everything from large transformers at substations all the way just to small appliances and other devices plugged in at your home would be destroyed. And even smaller devices that aren't plugged into the grid would still be vulnerable. Fortunately, there's some pretty easy and cheap things that you can do to help prepare for an EMP, and one of the best ways to do that is to just build a Faraday cage. I already showed a few ways to do that a few months ago, but then the question becomes, what exactly do you put inside of it? And in general, you want anything that you place in a Faraday cage to meet a couple of different criteria. First of all, you want it to be useful to you during a long-term survival situation, and there's a lot of technology that would be. Just because you can't use a cell phone to make calls or watch YouTube videos anymore, that doesn't mean that other things like radios and motion sensors automatically become useless. Then second of all, anything that you keep in a Faraday cage, you want to be able to keep that running over a period of months or years. Then another thing to think about is that you're probably going to have very little warning before an EMP. So because of that, you want anything that you plan on keeping in your Faraday cage to live in that Faraday cage most of the time. Don't plan on loading it up when stuff starts to go crazy because you're probably not going to have time to do that. A lot of preps like backup power sources generally just sit and wait to be used anyway, so storing one in a Faraday cage shouldn't be much of a problem. But for other things that you would use regularly, like flashlights, Faraday cages are good places to keep your backup, so that if something goes down, maybe you don't have your best or your favorite stuff, but you still have something. One of the most important things to include in a Faraday cage is a way to produce power. While many small electronics can be recharged, if you don't have a backup power source, doing that will be impossible. That means that you may be able to use certain devices for like a week or so, maybe longer if you have a ton of batteries stored, but after that, they're just going to be paperweights. So having some sort of reliable long-term backup power is really the linchpin of this entire plan. While gas generators are useful for short-term emergencies, and you can use a Faraday cage to protect one, using it would be a big challenge in a post-EMP world. First off, you obviously aren't going to be able to just run to a gas station and top off your gas cans when you need to. You could scavenge fuel, but doing that would be dangerous in a lot of situations. Gas generators are also pretty loud when they run, which could create a lot of security concerns. Because if everybody in your neighborhood is thrown back to the late 1800s, you do not want to be known as the only house within 3 miles that has a generator. Because of those reasons, some sort of solar power option is going to be a better choice in most circumstances. These don't require fuel to operate, and as long as you have sunlight, they should be able to work for years before their batteries give out. Pre-made solar generators are also fairly compact, so finding a metal container that can act as a Faraday cage for one shouldn't be that difficult. But these definitely will need to be protected because of the sensitive electronic components inside of them. Now, if you put together your own solar generator, some of the components will need protection, like charge controllers and inverters. Others, like batteries and solar panels, should be okay provided they aren't hooked up to anything. Portable solar panels, like what you'd use with a portable solar generator, however, could be another story. Many of them, like this one by Jackery, could have additional circuitry inside of them which may be vulnerable to an EMP. While they may be safe, I feel much better erring on the side of caution and keeping a couple of my extra panels inside of a makeshift Faraday box. Now, if we're dealing with a lot of ash that's blocked the sun because things went really bad, then having a wind power option would be beneficial. That's not something that I've done yet, but I assume a lot of the rules for it would be the same as a solar generator. Things like charge controllers and inverters would need to be protected. Batteries, just mechanical components, and anything non-electrical should be fine outside of a Faraday cage. Then since an EMP would likely precede a nuclear strike, it'd also be good to keep a Geiger counter or dosimeter in your Faraday cage. If you're someone who lives outside of a targeted area, then you could use those kinds of devices to determine things like Is it safe to go outside? Is this pond or lake safe to collect water from, or is your soil safe to garden in? A Geiger counter like this one is used to monitor real-time radiation levels, while a dosimeter keeps track of cumulative radiation exposure over time. The next group of items that you should keep in a Faraday cage is communication devices. While you could store an emergency radio like this one inside of your Faraday cage, they wouldn't be very useful after an EMP since most radio stations would be knocked out. However, other kinds of radios like walkie-talkies, GMRS, and ham radios would be much more useful. Walkie-talkies and GMRS radios can be used to communicate between members of your group or family, while ham radios could be used to communicate with other survivors at a greater distance away. And yes, there probably would be some ham radios in use because a lot of ham radio operators, they're preppers and they would take steps to protect at least some of their equipment. The next kind of item that you should keep in a Faraday cage is security devices. Being able to monitor your home and property can help keep you and your loved ones safe by giving you advance notice if somebody's headed your way. Magnetic door and window alarms like this one are inexpensive and don't take up much room inside of a Faraday cage because if an EMP were to happen, your current home security system would be useless. Even if your particular system can sound an alarm when it's disconnected from like cellular or Wi-Fi networks, all of its components are still going to be very vulnerable. Battery-operated motion sensors would be another good thing to keep inside of a Faraday cage. While anything that you already have in use outside could be damaged by an EMP, you can usually pick up extra sensors and base stations that you can protect and use if needed. These are an excellent backup to things like video doorbells that definitely wouldn't work after an EMP. And if you have a solar generator and some rechargeable batteries, you should be able to keep those running for years. If you have anything like night vision or infrared optics, those are definitely something that you would want to protect because if you had those things and the people that were trying to harm you and your family did not, that would give you a definite advantage over them. Then it also wouldn't be a bad idea to keep some battery-operated smoke and carbon monoxide alarms in there as well. Another thing that you can keep in a Faraday cage is medical equipment. Simple items like blood pressure monitors and glucose testers may not seem like they would be as important after a wide-scale collapse, but having those could allow you to make changes to your diet or other things that you're doing to help stay healthy, especially if you already have experience dealing with those conditions. But if you're going to be storing a glucose monitor, be sure to also store plenty of strips to go with it. Digital thermometers would be good to keep on hand to monitor fevers and help determine if someone needs to be isolated, but it's also a good idea to have some non-digital versions of those as well, along with other things like blood pressure cuffs. Humidifiers are useful for helping ease coughs, and they use very little power, meaning you should be able to run them for an extended period of time, even with a small power option. And if you need this kind of device and you can afford it, then picking up an extra CPAP machine may not be a bad idea. Then another item that you can keep in a Faraday cage is battery-operated fans, and that's especially true if you live in an area that gets hot during the summer. You can get those in several different configurations, like you can get them in just tabletop models, and you can get them as tent fans that you can rig up to be makeshift ceiling fans. Another thing that you should keep in a Faraday cage is emergency lighting. Some things like older flashlights and simple table and floor lamps may actually survive an EMP as long as they aren't plugged in, but anything that uses LEDs are going to be vulnerable. Modern lights also have other components that could be problems, including switches and the circuitry that controls the light's brightness and safety features like this auto dimmer. So because of that, it's a good idea to have some backup lights in your Faraday cage. Now, it is important to understand that using lights in that sort of situation always comes with a certain element of risk, because even small lights can be seen from a great distance, which can let people know that you have lighting and you probably have a way to keep it powered up. So because of that, you're going to need to exercise good light discipline, be careful how and when you use those lights, then also use other things like blackout curtains just to limit the amount of people that know that you have those things. Then as far as the actual lights I would use, I'd be sure to have a headlamp in there. This one, it's very bright. It's just not one that I use all the time. Then other things like this flashlight and lantern, they're a little bit finicky, but they still work well enough. Solar pathway lights like this are another good option since they'll give you an additional lighting source that doesn't require energy from your primary power source. Then I have this lantern by Milwaukee that runs on the same batteries as my power tools. You can adjust the direction of the light and also use it to charge a phone. And once again, there's nothing wrong with that light. I just use other things more now. But that does bring me to the next thing which you should store in a Faraday cage, and that's certain kinds of batteries. Now, most batteries should survive an EMP, especially if they're not installed in a device. So simple alkalines like AA, AAA, and D cells shouldn't have any problems, and that includes their rechargeable counterparts as well. However, other batteries, like those that power my lantern and my other power tools, will need to be protected. In addition to the power cells that hold a charge, those kinds of batteries also have additional components as well. They have circuitry in them to help prevent things like overheating, and those are the components that would be vulnerable to an EMP. I have a few tool batteries, so I'll probably just keep one in the Faraday cage as a backup. USB battery banks are similar in that they also have additional circuitry and should be protected as well. Now, when it comes to storing things like USB battery banks and power tool batteries, most of them nowadays have lithium-ion batteries, which should have a low self-discharge rate, meaning that you can store them without them losing their charge quickly. But it's still a good idea to check on those every couple of months or so just to make sure that they aren't depleted. Another battery-operated item that you should keep in a Faraday cage is battery chargers. Even chargers for things like AA's and AAA's have sensitive components in them that could be vulnerable, and the same is true for other kinds of battery chargers like those for power tool batteries. And then if you're able, power tools are another thing that would be good to store, although some may not consider them to be as high of a priority as some other items. But being able to build fortifications and make repairs quickly could be very beneficial in a lot of circumstances. In general, more modern tools and then also just cordless tools are going to be more vulnerable to an EMP. The switches on most tools are going to be a potential point of failure. Then those tools have a lot of additional circuitry in them for just safety and convenience features, and those present other points of failure. But power tools are another area where if you have them, you could store older tools or those you don't use that often, and keep your normal power tools out and available for use. This drill definitely isn't my favorite, but it would be a lot better than using a manual egg beater drill every time I need to drill a hole. Then, while I generally prefer my cordless circular saw, this one here is an absolute beast and it still works fine. The only downside to using older corded tools is that they tend to be energy hogs, so you're going to need a pretty substantial solar generator or inverter to get them running. Then another thing you can keep in a Faraday cage is old technology, like laptops and cell phones. Now, we all know that after an EMP, we aren't going to be using our phones to make calls. We're not going to be using our computers to send emails because the infrastructure needed to do those things is going to be taken out. But instead, the goal here is to use those devices to hold large amounts of useful information. And while physical books are always going to be preferred, and we've talked about them a lot on this channel, if you can store thousands of useful PDFs on a device, then why not? You don't lose anything by doing that. You can also use things like computers, phones, and tablets to hold pictures of loved ones, which would be good from a mental health standpoint, but it could also be very helpful if maybe you become separated from somebody. You could use those pictures to help identify them. Now, when you're using phones to hold pictures, you do need to make sure that the pictures are actually saved on the device instead of on the cloud, because if there's an EMP, the cloud will be a thing of the past. You could also keep an external hard drive in a Faraday cage to store even more information. For example, topo maps, if you order them, they can get pretty expensive, but you can also download them for free and print them yourself from the USGS website. So what you could do is you could just order or print from home the ones that you're definitely going to need in your immediate area, and then you could just download all the rest of them for maybe even like the tri-state area and then keep them on that device so you have them if you need them. Then when it comes to the actual Faraday cages and other enclosures, you have a few different options. Faraday bags like this one are good for protecting small electronics, like I use this one to store my Geiger counter, but they do have larger bags that can be used to protect other things, like computers or even generators. Then you can always just build your own. I did a video earlier this year showing 3 different ways to build a Faraday cage: a galvanized steel trash can, an ammo can, and a box wrapped in several layers of aluminum foil. But for even more protection, you might want to have a Faraday cage within a Faraday cage. For example, you could put some sort of device in like a box, wrap that box in a few layers of aluminum foil, and then put that in your galvanized steel trash can. Now, if you want to see more detailed instructions on how to build those different kinds of Faraday cages, then you can check out this video. Or if you want to see some more things that you would need in a situation like an EMP, then check out this video. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.